Hello and welcome back to the History Armada. I'm ShieldBro6 and I will be your guide as we take another look at a day in the life, the American Civil War. So last week we did a episode over the Carthaginian army and talked about the arms, armament, and organization of the army of Carthage. Well, today we will be talking about the armament and organization of the American Civil War. We will be grouping both the Union and the Confederate together to be talking about the main armaments and the main usages that occurred during the war. It will be kind of a overview video. We're not going to dive too deep into each weapon. We're not really going to talk about how they superseded each other or the difference between the two sides. We will be mainly focusing on the bigger picture of the war and the armaments that came forth. But first, I have a very exciting announcement. I have been accepted into the Humble Bundle Partnership Program. Humble Bundle sells games, ebooks, software, and other digital content. Their mission is to support charity while providing awesome content to customers at great discounted prices. They launched in 2010 with single 2-week Humble Bundle, but has grown into a store full of games, bundles, books, and more, as well as a game membership service and a game publishing service. The biggest point of Humble Bundle is you pay what you want. The core of their bundle philosophy is flexible pricing. When you buy a bundle, you can choose the price you want to pay. You can even choose how much money you give and how it's divided between the creators, such as myself if you use the referral link in the description, the charity you choose, the Humble Partners, and the Humble Bundle. What are Humble Bundles? Well, Humble Bundles are groups of similar books, games, or genres to help promote that service or that charity. And they also have something called Humble Choice. Humble Choice is a PC game membership that you can be utilized to get monthly games at great prices. There is also their Humble Store, which is the Humble Store is the digital storefront for all of their games, software, books, and more. So if you want to support them and check out their great prices, use my referral link in the description of the video and I will get a portion of the proceeds. So let's talk about the Civil War. The Civil War witnessed a technological revolution in weaponry. We saw a great revolution that was kind of similar to the Crimean War and was a predecessor to what would happen with World War I. This was highlighted by a changeover in shoulder-fired weapons from smoothbore firearms that had been loaded through the muzzle each time to rifle-barreled firearms, some of which were loaded at the breech. Most of these new rifle muskets still had to be loaded between each shot, but repeating weapons such as 7-shot Spencer rifles and 16-shot Henry rifles and carbines were developed as well during the war. Unfortunately for the common soldier, tactics did not advance as quickly as technology, as we would see with Crimea and World War I. Napoleonic linear tactics from earlier in the century, now combined with far more accurate, faster firing weapons, resulted in catastrophic casualty figures throughout the war. The Confederacy, whose industrial base was far weaker than the Union's when the war began, accomplished a great feat by establishing a viable arms manufacturing capability in short order. The North's industrial machine also swung into high gear to produce high quantities of high-quality weapons and ammunition. Agents from both the Union and the Confederacy scoured the shelves of European arms dealers to ensure that their arms had an adequate supply of weapons and munitions. Most Confederate infantrymen favored the English-manufactured Enfield rifle over the American-made rifles. So that's a quick overview. Let's dive into the different sections of the fighting forces. First off, we have the cavalry. Cavalry, although they often fought on foot, particularly as the war progressed, cavalry units typically looked for firearms that would be easy to reload from the back of a galloping horse. Cavalry in both the Union and the Confederate armies employed a variety of breech-loading single-shot rifle-barreled weapons known as carbines, or carbines, depending on how you pronounce it. The carbines, because their barrels were several inches shorter than the standard rifle muskets that infantry carried, also had shorter range. In addition, the cavalry weapons had a brutal recoil when fired, and despite their advantages in loading, most still required the cavalry soldier to manipulate a tiny cap onto the firing mechanism in order to fire. You would put the precision cap onto the firing plate. Confederate cavalry often brought sawed-off shotguns and cut down hunting rifles from home. Others used the standard infantry rifle muskets, though the longer barrels were awkward to wield on the horse and the muzzle loading was difficult on horseback. In addition to the carbines, cavalrymen also frequently used percussion revolvers. These handguns used rotating cylinders, they were revolvers after all, bored through with 5 or 6 chambers to allow multiple shots without reloading. The soldiers had to pour a powder charge into the chamber, ram a round or a conical ball on top, seal the front of the cylinder with grease to prevent one chamber from igniting the adjacent ones, and then place a percussion cap on the rear of each chamber before the gun was ready to be fired, which, as you see, was a very long and strenuous process that was not good in the heat of battle, well, especially on the back of a galloping horse. Once this time-consuming process was complete, the soldier could rely on 5 or 6 shots in succession. However, the sights on the handguns were crude, and a soldier could not expect to hit a target more than about 50 paces, or much less, on a horse. So let's now look at the overview of the infantry, the most condescending and most crucial part of the American Civil War. So the infantry. Most Civil War infantrymen, both Federal and Confederate, carried 58 caliber or 577 caliber rifle muskets. The rifle musket was first manufactured in the United States in 1855 and quickly replaced earlier smoothbore guns. The rifling, which was the spiral grooves etched into the inside of the gun's barrel, greatly increased the accuracy of the weapons by spinning and stabilizing the bullet as it sped towards the target. Kind of how you want to put a spin on a football when throwing a football to another person. That spiral helps it go farther and far more accurate. And it's the same concept with the rifle bore of these rifles. A trained marksman with these rifles could hit targets as far as 800 yards away, and even an average shot could expect to strike the mark at 250 yards. Smoothbore muskets, some of which were still being used during the Civil War, were generally unreliable at any range more than 75 yards, so 3/4 of an American football field. These rifle muskets were chiefly percussion weapons. Pulling the trigger of a rifle musket caused the weapon's hammer to strike the small percussion metal cap, and then the charge of mercury inside the cap would explode with the ignition and ignite the gunpowder charge inside the barrel, launching the projectile. The force of the gunpowder explosion drove the bullet, either a round ball or the mini ball, down the barrel, and the metal cap was tiny, about the size of a pencil eraser, and had to be set precisely into place by the human hand before the musket could be fired. Soldiers had to follow a 9 careful step regimen to load and fire a single bullet from a muzzle loading gun, and 5 to fire a breech loading weapon. So it either took 5 steps or 9 steps, depending on which rifle you had. Rifle muskets weighed between 6 and 10 pounds and were designed to fit a bayonet on the end of the barrel, as you can see in the picture on the right underneath the rifle barrels. So, that being said with the overview of musketry and firearms in the infantry, let's talk about one of the most highly rated of the rifle muskets, which was also manufactured at the United States Arsenal at Springfield, Massachusetts. Other prominent U.S. guns makers included Colt and Remington. In addition, rifle muskets could be imported from Europe. During the early campaigns, Confederate soldiers often armed themselves with captured Federal Springfields, as pictured here. Springfields were the quintessential gun of the early Civil War, and when you say Civil War rifle, this is what most people will think of. The Springfield. The Springfield 1855, usually 1861, one of those two, as you can see here with the bayonet. And that was the most important rifle, and both the Federal and Confederate armies also carried large numbers of English Enfield rifle muskets, as well as Austrian, Prussian, French, and Belgian guns, depending on how they could get them. The quality of imported guns ranged from the first-rate Enfield, which was equal or superior to the pictured Springfield, or to barely functional, depending on what state they were able to arrive in. The Springfield, though, I will again say, was the quintessential and important musket rifle of the time, that in the infield. In addition to standard muzzle-loading rifle muskets, a few Civil War infantrymen carried breech-loading guns like the Sharps, or repeating rifles like the Spencer and the Henry. Breech-loading weapons were easier and faster to reload than muzzle-loading rifles were. Even from a position flat on the ground, you could open the breech and reload, which was a great advantage to the muzzle-loading weapons. That being said, repeaters offered a additional advantage since they could be fired, in the case of the Henry, up to 20 times without reloading. You would open the breech and load it all the way up, and then you had that many shots. You can see the different rifles and breech loaders here pictured. We've got the Springfield Rifle 1861 that I mentioned last slide, the Pattern 1853 Enfield, the Mississippi Rifle of 1841, Sharp Rifle 1863, Spencer Rifle, Morse Carbine, Colt Revolving Percussion Rifle, Henry Repeating Rifle, which was the one I just mentioned that had the 20 shots, the Burnside Carbine, the Mini Ball, which was the quintessential round being fired from the rifled muskets, their sables, their bayonets, their Remingtons, Colt Armies, and Star revolvers, the Tarpley Carbine, the Smith Carbine, and the Maynard Carbine. That being said, although the breech loaders and the repeaters were only a small percentage of the total number of guns used by the Civil War infantrymen, units that carried these weapons gained a distinct edge over even a much larger enemy force because they could fire from cover without having to reload, such as laying down, and they were able to fire much faster as well. That brings us to the next step of firing rapidly, which was the Gatling Gun. The Gatling Gun was made in 1862 by Richard Jordan Gatling, invented the multi-barreled rotating gun operated by hand crank that is pictured here, and it could fire up to 200 rounds a minute, which was groundbreaking for the time period. It was used only a handful of times during the Civil War, and it was only used by the Union forces. The Gatling gun would later become the first widely successful machine gun, helping win the Wild West and defeat the Native forces with its rapid-fire usage. That brings us to field artillery. There was also naval bases and ship artillery, but we're not going to get into that today, just know they existed. As for the field artillery, there were two general types of artillery weapons used during the Civil War: smoothbore artillery and rifled artillery. Smoothbores included howitzers and guns, and the principal guns widely used in the field are as follows. There was the 6-pounder gun, which was made of bronze. There was the M1857 12-pounder Napoleon bronze gun, the 12-pounder howitzer, the 12-pounded Mountain howitzer, the 24-pounder howitzer, the 10-pound Parrott rifle, the 3-inch ordnance rifle, the 14-pounder James rifle, the 20-pound Parrott rifle, and the 12-pound Whitworth breech-loading rifle. So, mainly used was the smoothbores, and especially amongst the Confederacy, the 12-pound Napoleon gun was very popular and would see a lot of usage in the field. Those were the main guns. We're not really going to step into the realm of what each one's difference was other than the poundage. I might do a video in the future if you guys want to hear about that. But you can see there's the multiple of the same makers, such as the howitzer. The howitzer made both the 12-pounder, the 12-pound Mountain, and the 24-pound howitzer guns. And then again with Parrott, who made the 10-pound, 6-pound, and 20-pound guns. So there was often a different size made by the same maker. Then they would have the different size caliber and poundage, which again was very important depending on what range you were firing at and what impact you wanted the gun to have. So that being said, that will conclude and kind of round out our look at a day in the life, the armaments of the American Civil War, and I thank you for bearing with me. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of A Day in the Life, and I hope you learned a little something about the armaments and the American Civil War overall. So, we will delve further in coming videos about the difference between the two sides, and especially if you guys are interested. If you have any comments, suggestions, or concerns, or I got something wrong, please leave that in the comment section down below for me. I do read all the comments. If you like this content and you like this channel, please hit the like and the subscribe button for me. If you want to support me further, check out the links in the description of the video, and of course, a big thank you to the sponsor, Humble Bundle, for accepting us into the partner program. With that being said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. This was your weekly dose of history. I am ShieldBro6 for the History Armada, and I'll catch y'all next time. Thanks for watching.